Some people are born into rooms full of light and spend their whole lives learning how to disappear inside them. Others are born into the dark and spend their whole lives trying to be seen. Wren Callahan belonged to the second kind. Julian Ashcroft belonged to the first. On any honest map of the world, their two lives were never meant to touch. One of them lived 4 flights above a shuttered laundromat, counting coins on the counter at the end of every month. The other lived at the top of a glass tower with his family name carved in stone above the door. But the night the storm came, the map stopped matching, and the universe, which has a cruel sense of humor and an even crueler sense of timing, shoved 2 strangers who should never have met into the same small room and locked the door behind them. The rain had been falling since noon. By the time Wren finished her second shift at Crumb and Ember, the street was a black river carrying leaves toward the drain. She pulled her thin coat over her head and ran, flowers still under her fingernails, the smell of burnt sugar in her hair. 12 hours on her feet. A blister on her left heel. $41 in tips folded into her back pocket, which was $41 closer to a rent she was still going to be short on. She was too tired to be afraid of anything. That, she would think later, was the only reason the night happened at all. The stairwell light on the 3rd floor had been broken for a month. She climbed by memory, counting the steps the way she always did. 9 to the landing. Turn. 9 more. She was reaching for her keys when she saw him. A man was sitting on the top step outside her door, folded into the corner where the wall met the window, knees drawn up, soaked to the bone. He wore a tuxedo. An actual tuxedo, the kind she had only ever seen in the windows of shops she never entered, except this one was ruined, the white shirt gone gray with rain, the bow tie hanging undone around his collar like something surrendered. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead. There was a small cut above his eyebrow. And when he lifted his head and looked at her, his eyes were the exhausted color of a man who had run a very long way from something and had finally run out of road. For a moment neither of them moved. "If you scream," he said, his voice low and hoarse, "I understand completely." "I'd scream too." Wren did not scream. She gripped her keys so the longest one stuck out between her knuckles, and she said, "You have 10 seconds to explain why you're outside my door before I call the police." Something flickered across his face at the word police. She caught it and filed it away without knowing yet what it meant. "I'm not dangerous," he said. "I know that's exactly what a dangerous person would say. But it's raining, and the door downstairs was propped open with a brick, and this was the only landing where the light was out." He almost smiled. "It didn't reach anywhere. I wanted somewhere no one would look." "Who's looking for you?" He didn't answer. He pressed the back of his head against the wall and closed his eyes, and for the first time she noticed he was shivering, the kind that comes from the inside and can't be stopped by will alone. There was a pale band of skin on his left ring finger, as though something that had lived there a long time had recently been taken off. She should have called someone. Any reasonable person would have. She stood there in the dark and did the math she always did, the math of a woman who had spent her whole life being the one nobody helped. If she shut the door on him, he would still be there in the morning, or he wouldn't, and either way she would lie awake wondering which. "You're not coming in," she said. "I wasn't going to ask. But I'm not stepping over a freezing man to get to my own bed either." She unlocked the door and stood back. The couch. "One night. You touch anything of mine and I will end you, and I have a cast iron pan and nothing left to lose. Do we understand each other?" He looked up at her then, really looked, the way people do when they have forgotten that strangers are sometimes kind. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "how many people would have walked past." "I have every idea," Wren said. "I've been the one on the floor." She would remember that sentence later, on a day when everything had changed, and marvel at how casually she had told a billionaire the truest thing about herself before either of them knew who the other was. But that was later. For now she was only a tired woman letting a wet stranger drip onto her second-hand rug, unaware that she had just opened her door to a man the entire city would be hunting by morning, whose face was about to appear on every screen she owned, who was worth more money than she could count if she lived 1,000 years. If this story is already pulling you in, take a second to show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves a story that starts on the worst night and turns into the best one. Every like, every comment, every share helps us keep bringing these stories to you. She got him a towel. It was thin and faded and the best one she owned, and he took it like she had handed him something made of gold. His name, he told her, was Julian. Just Julian. He offered it the way a man offers half of something because he cannot yet afford to give the whole. Wren didn't push. She had learned, working the counter, that people tell you who they are when they are ready and not 1 second before, and that the fastest way to make someone lie is to demand the truth. She made tea because it was the only warm thing she had, in 2 mismatched mugs, and she gave him the one without the chip. He wrapped both hands around it and breathed in the steam like it was the first kind thing that had happened to him in years. "You said someone was looking for you," she said, sitting on the arm of the couch, keeping her distance. "Are you in trouble with the law?" "No." He said it fast, and it was true, and something in her shoulders eased. "The opposite, almost. I'm in trouble with everyone who's supposed to be on my side." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He turned the mug in his hands. "I was supposed to get married today." The rain filled the silence. "Supposed to," Wren repeated. There were 400 guests. "My tie was tied by a man whose only job in life is to tie other men's ties." He gave a short, broken laugh. "And I stood in a room behind the altar, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I realized I could not remember the last time anyone had asked me what I wanted. Not once. Not since I was a boy. Everyone in my life has a plan for me." She had a plan. Her father had a plan. My board had a plan. He stopped, aware he'd said too much, and looked at her. "So I walked out the side door. I've been walking ever since." Wren studied him. The ruined tuxedo. The band of pale skin on his finger. The particular tiredness that had nothing to do with the weather. "You left her at the altar," she said. "I left before the altar. There's a distinction I'm clinging to." He set the mug down. "You think I'm a coward?" "I think," Wren said slowly, "that a man who runs into the rain in a $5,000 suit rather than say one honest word to the people in that room has some things to figure out. But I've never had 400 people watching me make a mistake. I've made all of mine alone." She stood. "You can figure it out on my couch. Bathroom's there. Don't use all the hot water, there isn't much." He watched her cross the room, and something shifted in his face that she didn't see, the look of a man who has spent his whole life surrounded by people who wanted something from him and has just met someone who wanted him gone. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "You don't know me." She paused at her bedroom door. "Because somebody should have helped me once, and nobody did, and I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to be the nobody in somebody else's story." She flicked off the main light. "Good night, Julian." Just Julian. He lay awake on the couch that was too short for him, in a room that smelled of cinnamon and old books and rain, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, no one knew where he was. No assistant. No driver. No woman with a plan and a diamond and a father who owned 3 senators. The relief of it was so enormous it frightened him. Down the hall, Wren lay awake too, listening to another person breathing in her apartment, telling herself she had done a foolish thing and would fix it in the morning by sending him on his way. Neither of them slept much. Both of them pretended, when the gray light finally came, that they had. She woke before him and stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the stranger asleep on her couch, one arm thrown over his eyes. In sleep the exhaustion had smoothed out of his face and left something younger, something almost unguarded. She thought, without wanting to, that he was handsome in the way expensive things are handsome, cared for, unbroken by the ordinary. And then she thought about her $41 and her short rent and told herself to stop. She made coffee. The smell woke him. "There's exactly enough for 1 cup, she said, and I'm having it. But there's toast, if you can handle store-brand jam." He sat up, blinking, and then he found her in the kitchen and the lostness went away. "I can handle store-brand jam," he said, with a gravity that made her laugh before she could stop herself. He ate 3 pieces of toast and told her it was the best breakfast he'd had in a year, and the terrible thing was that she believed him. He offered to wash the plates. She told him he'd probably never washed a plate in his life. He rolled up his ruined sleeves, ran the water too hot, and proved her right, and by the time the last plate was dried and stacked wrong in the cupboard, the strangeness between them had worn into something almost like ease. She should have sent him away then. The rain had stopped. The city was open. He had money, clearly, somewhere, once he decided to be found. Instead she said, "Stay off the street until dark. You look like exactly what you are, and people notice a man in a tuxedo at 9 in the morning." And he said, "Thank you," in a voice that cracked slightly in the middle, and she pretended not to hear it, and something small and dangerous took root in the space between them that neither of them was ready to name. By the second day, they had rules. Julian was not allowed to answer her door. He was not allowed near the window that faced the street. He was not allowed to say anything about her apartment being small, which he had done once, admiringly, and which had earned him a look that could have curdled milk. In exchange, Wren was not allowed to ask him for his last name, or what he did, or why a grown man with obvious money owned nothing but a soaked tuxedo and a haunted expression. It was a strange arrangement, built on the shared understanding that neither of them was ready for the other's whole truth. And in the narrow space left over, once all the forbidden things were set aside, something unexpected grew. They talked. He learned that she had raised her younger sister, Posy, after their mother left, that she'd wanted to go to art school and had gotten in and had folded the acceptance letter into a drawer instead because someone had to keep the lights on. He learned that she drew on the backs of receipts when the bakery was slow, quick clever little sketches of the customers, and that she was better than she believed and would rather die than be told so. She learned that he could cook, actually cook, that under all the polish was a man who found a strange peace in chopping an onion. He made her dinner on the second night out of the sad contents of her refrigerator, and it was the best meal she'd eaten in months, and when she said so he looked so absurdly pleased that she had to turn away to hide her own smile. She learned that he was lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. That there had been people around him constantly his whole life and not one of them, he said, had ever once shown up simply to see if he was all right. "You did that," he told her on the second night, drying a glass. "You didn't know me. You had nothing to gain. You did it anyway." "Don't make it a big thing," Wren said. "I'd have done it for a wet dog." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it a big thing." She didn't have an answer for that, so she threw a dish towel at his head, and he caught it, and they both laughed, and the sound of it in her small apartment was so foreign and so good that she felt her throat tighten. She caught herself watching him. The way he stood at her stove with his sleeves rolled up. The line of his jaw when he was concentrating. The way he'd taken to wearing an old flannel shirt of her father's that she'd never been able to give away, and how it made him look like he belonged in a life he had never actually lived. She caught herself, and she stopped, because she knew exactly how this kind of story ended for women like her. Men like him did not stay in fourth-floor walk-ups. They visited, the way the sun visits a basement, and then they went back to the sky. On the third night, the power went out on the whole block. She found candles. They sat on the floor with their backs against the couch, close because the light made a small warm island and the dark pressed in on all sides, and they talked until 2 in the morning about nothing and everything. "Can I ask you something?" she said, "that isn't against the rules?" "You can try." "Are you happy? Out there? In your real life?" He was quiet for a long time. The candle flame bent and straightened. "I don't think anyone ever asked me that," he said finally. "I think I decided a long time ago that happiness wasn't a thing my kind of life was for. That it was for other people. Smaller lives. Warmer ones. He turned his head and looked at her in the candlelight. Lives like this. Careful, she said, her heart doing something inconvenient. That almost sounded like an insult and a compliment fighting to the death. It was neither. It was envy. The space between them had gotten very small. She was aware of the warmth of his shoulder near hers, of the fact that if either of them leaned, the leaning would become a thing that happened, a thing that could not be taken back. She thought about her rent. She thought about the pale band on his finger, already fading. She thought that she had known this man for 3 days and would apparently follow him off a cliff, and that this was exactly the kind of foolishness she had spent her whole careful life avoiding. She leaned away. "We should sleep," she said. "Wren." It was the first time he'd said her name like that, low, careful, like it was something he'd been saving. "Thank you. For the candles. For the couch. For treating me like a person and not like a," he stopped. "Like a person. Go to sleep, Julian." She lay in the dark that night and admitted the thing she would not say out loud, that she did not want him to go. That the apartment had been unbearably empty for years and she had only realized it now that it wasn't. That she was, against every rule she had ever made for herself, beginning to fall for a man whose last name she wasn't allowed to know. She had no idea that she already knew his face. That it was, at that very moment, on the front page of every newspaper in the city, under a headline about a vanished heir and a frantic search, above a photograph of a man in a tuxedo who looked nothing like the one asleep on her couch in her dead father's flannel shirt. The knock came at 7 in the morning. Not the soft knock of a neighbor asking for sugar. 3 hard raps, evenly spaced, the sound of authority that expects the door to open. Wren was at the counter measuring coffee. Julian was still asleep on the couch. She froze with the scoop halfway to the pot, and every instinct she owned went cold and quiet at once. "Police. Open up, please." She heard Julian come awake behind her, heard the couch creak, heard him go absolutely still the way a hunted thing goes still when the hounds are close. "Bathroom," she whispered, not turning around. "Now. Quietly. Don't run the tap." He didn't argue. She heard the door click shut. She smoothed her shirt, pulled the belt of her robe tighter, took one slow breath, and opened the door on the chain. 2 officers stood on the landing. Behind them, one step down, was a third man, older, in a charcoal coat that had cost more than everything in her apartment combined, holding a phone like a weapon. His eyes went past her into the room before she'd said a single word, cataloging, measuring. "Sorry to disturb you, ma'am." The officer was polite, tired, holding a tablet. "We're canvassing the building. Have you seen this man in the last 3 days?" He turned the tablet around. It was Julian. A studio photograph, black suit, cold and flawless and remote, the face of a man on the cover of a magazine. And beneath it, in letters she read 3 times before they made sense, Julian Ashcroft. And beneath that, Chairman, Ashcroft Global. And a number with so many zeros trailing after it that her mind refused, at first, to attach it to the man currently hiding behind her bathroom door in her dead father's flannel shirt. The floor did a slow, sickening tilt beneath her bare feet. "Ma'am." Wren had spent her whole life learning how to keep her face still while the world moved underneath her. Landlords. Managers. Men who thought a girl behind a counter was theirs to frighten. She used every bit of that hard-won stillness now. "No," she said. "I haven't seen him." "Is he dangerous?" "No, ma'am." "Missing person?" "High profile." "His family's very concerned." The officer's eyes flicked past her, professional, incurious. The man in the charcoal coat, however, was not incurious. He was studying her the way a jeweler studies a stone for the flaw that drops its price. "He hasn't come to this door?" the man asked. His voice was smooth and cold and used to being answered instantly. "You'd remember." He isn't the sort of man one forgets. I work 14-hour days, Wren said. Half the time I wouldn't remember my own reflection. I'm sorry. I hope you find him. The officer thanked her and turned to the next door. The man in the coat did not turn. He held her gaze one full second too long, the way powerful people do to see whether you will flinch, and Wren, who had been stared down by worse men over smaller things, did not flinch. He drew a card from an inside pocket and slid it through the gap above the chain. If your memory improves, he said, there is a considerable reward. The family is generous to its friends. A pause, precise as a scalpel. And extremely unforgiving of anyone who turns out not to be one. Do think it over carefully. She took the card. She closed the door. She slid the chain back into place with hands that had begun to shake. When she opened the bathroom door, Julian was sitting on the edge of the tub with his head in his hands. He looked up. He already knew. She could see that he already knew. Ashcroft, she said. The name came out flat and strange. As in the tower on Meridian. As in the bank on every corner. As in the building I can see from my own window with your name on the top of it in letters 6 feet tall. Wren. Your worth, she stopped. She couldn't say the number. It was obscene in her small bathroom, next to her cracked tile and her one good towel. You let me apologize for the store-brand jam. I loved the store-brand jam. He stood, slowly, and she stepped back, and the flinch of it hurt him visibly, a wince he couldn't hide. Wren. Everything I told you was true. Every single word. I only left out the one part that ruins it. The part that ruins it, she repeated. You mean the part where you're the single richest man in the city and I'm a woman with $41 who just lied to the police for you. Her voice climbed, and she yanked it back down. That man in the coat. Who is he? Julian's jaw tightened. Gerald Rourke. My bride's father. He owns half the people who matter in this city, and right now he's more afraid of the deal falling through than he is of me turning up dead. He looked at her, and there was something desperate in it. The wedding wasn't a wedding. It was a merger. His company and mine. I was the signature at the bottom of the contract, and I couldn't sign my whole life away to people who see me as a line item. So I ran. And the first genuinely kind thing that has happened to me in 10 years was you, opening that door in the rain. Wren stood in the wreckage of everything she'd let herself feel for 3 days, the card from Gerald Rourke still sharp between her fingers. You should have told me, she said. If I'd told you, he said quietly, would you have opened the door? And she had no answer, because the honest one was no, and they both knew it, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. She didn't turn him in. She told herself it was because of the reward, that a woman with $41 couldn't afford to trust a man like Gerald Rourke to actually pay, that his kind took what they wanted and left you holding the receipt. But that wasn't it, and she knew it wasn't, and the not knowing why sat in her chest like a stone. They didn't speak much that morning. He kept to his corner. She went to work because rent did not care about billionaires in flannel shirts, and she spent the whole shift misreading orders and burning the first tray of scones, seeing that name every time she blinked. Ashcroft. 6 feet tall on the skyline. She'd walked under it 1,000 times. Tessa cornered her by the ovens. You look like you've seen a ghost. Didn't sleep. You've been not sleeping in a very specific direction all week. Tessa was her oldest friend, sharp as a paring knife, impossible to lie to. Wren. Whatever it is. Whoever it is. Be careful. People like us don't get the fairy tale. We get the bill afterward. It was exactly what Wren had been telling herself for 3 days, and hearing it out loud made her want to argue, which told her everything about how far gone she already was. She came home to find the apartment clean. Really clean, the windows she never had time for, the leaking tap under the sink somehow no longer leaking. He'd found tools. He'd fixed her faucet. A billionaire had spent his day of hiding fixing a stranger's sink because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. "You didn't have to do that," she said, standing in the doorway. "I've never fixed anything in my life," he said. "Do you have any idea how good it feels to make one thing better than you found it?" He wiped his hands on a rag. "I looked it up. On your laptop. I hope that's all right. I didn't look up anything else. I didn't message anyone. I just wanted to be useful. For once. To someone who didn't have to be nice to me about it." And that was the thing that undid her, in the end. Not the money. The opposite of the money. The way this man who could buy the building had spent the afternoon on his knees under her sink for no reason except that she'd been kind to him and he wanted to give something back that couldn't be bought. "Sit down," she said. "I'm going to make dinner, and you're going to tell me the whole thing. The real whole thing. No parts left out." So he told her. He told her about a father who measured love in quarterly returns and a mother who had died when he was 12 and taken the last warmth in the house with her. He told her about the birthday parties that were really press opportunities, the report cards read aloud to shareholders, the single photograph of his mother he kept in a drawer because his father had ordered all the rest taken down. About being sent away to schools that taught him everything except how to be a person. About a company he had inherited at 26 and never once chosen, a machine with 10,000 employees whose livelihoods he actually, genuinely lay awake worrying about, which was the trap of it, the thing that kept him signing. About Camilla Rourke, who was not cruel, only cold, raised in the same machine, a woman who wanted the marriage as little as he did and had made her peace with it because peace, for her, had always meant surrender. "She deserves better than a groom who ran," he said. "So do her people. So do mine. I didn't run because I'm brave, Wren. I ran because I'm a coward who finally couldn't breathe." "That's not cowardice," Wren said. "That's the first honest thing you've done in 10 years. It just looks like cowardice from the outside because honest things usually do." He looked at her across the small table, in the light of her one working lamp, and something passed between them that was heavier than anything yet. "I have to go back," he said. "You know that. Not today. But soon. There are 10,000 people who don't get to eat if I hide in your apartment forever. I can't fix it by running. I can only fix it by walking back in and, for the first time in my life, saying no with my own mouth." "I know," she said. "But I don't want to go back to who I was when I walked in." He reached across the table, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and covered her hand with his. His was warm. Hers was still. "You changed something. I don't have the words for it yet. I just know I don't want to lose it the second I leave." Wren looked at their hands. At the pale band on his finger, almost gone now. At the enormous, impossible distance between a woman with $41 and a man with a tower, and at how small that distance felt across one cheap kitchen table. "Then don't lose it," she said. "But Julian, don't make me a promise you'll forget the moment you're back under your own name. I've been forgotten by better-intentioned people than you." "I won't forget you," he said. "I've spent 3 days learning what it feels like to be seen. I'm not going back to being invisible to the one person who actually looked." She should have believed him. She wanted to. But she'd survived this long by not believing beautiful things said late at night, and so she took her hand back, gently, and stood to clear the plates, and pretended the warmth of his palm wasn't still printed on her skin like a burn she'd carry for days. He stayed 2 more days, and they were, both of them would later admit, the best days either had ever known. They did nothing extraordinary. That was the extraordinary part. He had spent his life in helicopters and boardrooms and restaurants with no prices on the menu, and what he wanted, it turned out, was to walk to the corner market in a baseball cap pulled low and argue with Wren about which apples were worth the extra 30 cents. He wanted to sit on the fire escape at dusk with a carton of cheap noodles and watch the city turn gold. He wanted to be nobody, with her, for as long as the world would let him. He rode a public bus for the first time and grinned like a boy at a fair. He learned the name of the woman at the market and the man who fed the pigeons. He counted change into his palm and felt, absurdly, proud of it. Each small ordinary thing landed on him like a gift he had been told his whole life he was too important to open. She showed him the rooftop. It was the one luxury the building had, a flat tar roof with a view of the whole skyline, and she'd been coming up there since she was a teenager to draw and to breathe. She brought her sketchbook. He asked to see it. She refused. He asked again. She threatened him with the cast iron pan, which had become a joke between them, and then, because the sky was doing something impossible with pink and the noodles were warm and he had looked at her all day like she was the interesting one, she handed it over. He turned the pages slowly. The customers. The city. The quick clever lines she was ashamed of and shouldn't have been. He didn't say she was talented, which she'd have batted away. He said, "This is how you see the world," very quietly, and it's kinder than the world deserves, and she had to look very hard at the skyline for a while after that. "There's the tower," she said finally, to change the subject, pointing. His name burned against the darkening sky. "Doesn't it feel strange? Seeing your own name up there?" "It's not my name," he said. "It's my father's. I just live under it." He was quiet a moment. "Up here it looks small. Down there it runs my whole life. Perspective is a funny thing," says the man on the roof of a walk-up eating $2 noodles. "Best $2 anyone's ever spent on me." She laughed, and he watched her laugh, and the laugh faded, and then they were just two people sitting very close on a rooftop with the whole glittering impossible city spread out below them, and the moment stretched and thinned until it was almost unbearable. "Wren," he said. "Don't," she said, but she didn't move away. "I'm going to say it anyway, because I've spent 10 years not saying things and it nearly killed me." He turned to face her. "I've known you 5 days. It makes no sense. I don't care. When I'm with you I feel like a person instead of a signature. I don't want to go back to a life where that feeling is a thing I visited once and lost." "You have a company," she said, her voice unsteady. "You have 10,000 people. You have a father who owns senators and a fiancé and a name on the sky. And I have a bakery apron and a sister in community college and a rent I'm short on this month. This isn't a story where those two things fit together. I've read enough of those stories to know how the woman like me ends up. She ends up in a headline. She ends up as the thing your kind of people call a phase. Then let me be the story where they're wrong." She looked at him. The cut above his eyebrow had healed to a thin pale line. The exhaustion was gone. What was left was just a man, terrified and certain, asking for something no one had ever let him ask for. She kissed him first. She would always be a little proud of that. She reached up and took his face in her flower-scarred hands and kissed him, and it was nothing like she'd imagined and exactly like she'd needed, slow and stunned and then not slow at all, his hand sliding into her hair, her whole body turning toward his like something that had been cold for years finding fire. The noodles went over. Neither of them noticed. The city glittered on, indifferent and enormous, and for one long moment there was no tower and no name and no $41, only the two of them on a rooftop, kissing like the world was ending, which, in a way neither of them could see yet, it was about to. When they broke apart they were both breathing hard, foreheads together, and he was laughing softly, disbelieving. "I ran out of my own wedding," he said, "so I could find that. You didn't know I existed when you ran." "No," he said. "But something did." He kissed her again, gentler. "I have to go back tomorrow. Not to them. To end it. Properly, with my own mouth, the way I should have from the start. And then I'm going to come back here, up these stairs, and knock on your door as myself. Julian Ashcroft. Not just Julian. And I'm going to ask you to give a ridiculous, impossible thing a chance. And if the world eats you alive the second you walk back in, then I'll come back chewed up," he said, and you'll patch me together with store-brand jam and a cast-iron pan. She laughed, and she cried a little, and she let herself, for one night on a rooftop, believe him. The believing lasted until 3 the next afternoon. He left at dawn, in the flannel shirt because it was all he had, with a baseball cap pulled low and 40 of her $41, which he swore he would return 1,000-fold and which she gave him only because he genuinely had nothing, and it was the funniest and saddest thing she had ever done. He kissed her at the door, slow, certain. He said, "Tonight. I'll be back tonight, as myself." He went down the 9 steps and turned and looked up at her once, and then he was gone, and the apartment was so empty she could hear the clock on the wall counting off the seconds. She went to work. She burned nothing, which felt like a small kind of progress. And at 3 o'clock, Tessa turned the little television above the counter toward her with a face like a closed door. Julian was on the screen. Not the flannel shirt. Not the baseball cap. A charcoal suit, sharp as a blade, standing at a podium with the Ashcroft logo glowing behind him and Gerald Rourke at his shoulder and a beautiful, glacial woman in pale blue at his side who could only be Camilla. Cameras flashed like a lightning storm. A banner crawled along the bottom of the screen, Ashcroft Air returns. Wedding back on. Merger secured. Wren stood very still, a tray of cooling scones forgotten in her hands. A reporter's voice came tinny through the counter speaker, "Any comment on the rumors that you spent the missing days in hiding with a woman?" And Gerald Rourke leaning smoothly into the microphone before Julian could open his mouth, "There was no woman. My future son-in-law needed time to grieve the pressures of a demanding life. That time is over. The families are united. The wedding proceeds Saturday. We would ask the press to respect a private matter that has been badly and irresponsibly distorted." And Julian standing there in the suit that fit him like a cage, saying nothing. Saying nothing at all. His face perfectly, terribly still. The face from the tablet. The magazine face. The signature face she thought she had watched fall away over 5 days in her kitchen. Tessa reached up and turned the television off. The bakery was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Tessa said. "I really am." Wren set down the tray. She untied her apron with steady hands. "Don't be. You told me. Everybody told me. I told me." She hung the apron on its hook. "I just didn't listen." She walked home in the cold. She climbed the 9 steps and the 9 steps. She let herself into an apartment that still smelled of him, of onions and rain and her father's flannel, and she saw the sink he had fixed and the plate he had stacked wrong in the cupboard, and she sat down on the floor with her back against the couch where he had slept, and she did not cry, because crying was for people who had let themselves believe, and she had known better. She had always known better. He didn't come that night. She left the hall light on anyway, for someone she had decided not to expect. He didn't come the next. On the 3rd day a courier arrived, a real courier in a real uniform, holding an envelope so thick and creamy it felt like a slap. Inside was a check. The number on it would have paid her rent for 10 years, cleared Posey's tuition, bought back every folded dream in her drawer. There was no note. Just the check, and the meaning of it, clean and cold and unmistakable, "For services rendered. For your discretion. For the trouble. Go away, and stay away." She understood then, fully, what she had been. Not a story. A phase. The thing his kind of people paid off and forgot before the ink was dry. The man in the charcoal coat had promised the family was generous to its friends and unforgiving of everyone else, and here was the generosity, and she understood that cashing it would make her exactly what Gerald Rourke had decided she was from the first second his eyes went past her into the room. She did not cash the check. She put it in the drawer with her folded art school acceptance letter, the 2 great impossible dreams of her life kept together in the same dark place, and she went back to work, and she got very, very good at not thinking about a man in a flannel shirt. What she did not know, could not have known, was what Julian had been doing during those 3 silent days. That he had walked into the podium ambush cold and blindsided, that Rourke had staged the whole thing before he could speak, positioning the cameras so that any refusal would read as a breakdown. That his own board had informed him, calmly, over glasses of good scotch, that if he broke the merger the company would face a hostile takeover within the quarter and 10,000 people would lose their jobs, and that the woman he had been seen with would be found, named, and destroyed unless he cooperated. That Gerald Rourke had looked him dead in the eye and said, "You can have your little baker's ruin, or you can have your silence and her safety. Choose." That the check had gone out without Julian's knowledge or consent. That when he learned of it, he had put his fist through a 200-year-old mirror and stood bleeding in front of the empty frame, understanding at last exactly what his name had cost him, and exactly what it was going to cost him to become worthy of the woman who had refused it. But Wren didn't know any of that. Wren knew only the check, and the silence, and the wedding on Saturday, now 3 short days away. The story, of course, did not stay quiet. Money that large moves the water around it, and by Thursday the water had reached the press. Someone at the bank, or the courier company, or Rourke's own office, put a price and a face together, and by Friday morning Wren Callahan's name was in a headline she had not written and could not stop. Baker's secret weekend with runaway billionaire, the kindest one read. The others were worse. They found her building. They found the bakery. They found a photograph of her from a coworker's page and ran it beside Julian's magazine face with the word mystery woman stamped across it, and then, within hours, with Rourke's machine humming behind the scenes, the story turned. She was no longer a mystery. She was a schemer. A woman who had lured a vulnerable man in crisis, who had held him for a payout, who had cashed in. The check she had refused became, in their telling, a check she had demanded. The $40 she had given him became proof of a con. They took the truest, kindest thing she had ever done and turned it inside out until it looked exactly like the thing she had spent her whole life being accused of by people who could not imagine kindness without an angle. Reporters stood outside Crumb and Ember. Her manager, frightened, asked her to take a few days. Posey called crying because someone had come to her college. Tessa stood in front of the ovens with her arms crossed and said, "This is what I meant. This is exactly what I meant," and Wren said, "I know," and meant it, and hated that she meant it. She could have hidden. Everyone expected her to hide. That was what the woman in the story was supposed to do, disappear, confirm her guilt by vanishing, let them write her ending for her. But Wren had spent her whole life being written by other people. Her mother's leaving had written her. Her poverty had written her. The folded acceptance letter in the drawer had written her. She was so tired of being a thing that happened in someone else's account of the world, a footnote in a story about a man. So on Friday afternoon, with the cameras massed on the sidewalk, she walked out the front door of the bakery, in her apron, flowers still on her hands, and she stopped in front of the microphones that had been waiting to catch her running. And she did not run. "You want a statement," she said. "Here's one. I found a man on my landing in the rain and I gave him a couch because he was cold, and I've been cold before, and nobody helped me. I didn't know his name. I didn't want his money. I didn't cash the check, and if any one of you had done a single honest hour of work instead of the work you were paid to do, you would know that." A camera flashed in her face. She didn't blink. "You want me to be the villain because it's a cleaner story. A poor woman who tricked a rich man is easy. A rich family that bought a wedding and paid off a witness is harder, and it doesn't run, does it, because they own the paper it would run in." She wiped her hands on her apron, slow and deliberate. "I'm not ashamed of one single thing I did. I was kind to a stranger. If that's a scandal where you live, then your world is a great deal sicker than my rent." She turned and walked back inside, and the footage of it, 30 seconds of a woman in a flour-dusted apron refusing to be made small, was on every feed by evening. And it did something no press release from Gerald Rourke could undo. It made people believe her. Comment by comment, share by share, the tide began, quietly, to turn. But belief is slow and weddings are fast, and Saturday was coming. Across the city, in a hotel suite the size of her whole building, Julian watched that footage on a silent screen. He watched her refuse to run. And something that had been slowly hardening in him for 3 days finished setting into place, like concrete, like resolve, like a verdict handed down. He had spent those 3 days doing the math his father had trained him to do. The company. The 10,000 jobs. The safety of the woman he loved, held hostage against his obedience. He had told himself, the way frightened people do, that surrender was the responsible choice, that love was a luxury and duty was the price of his name. And then he had watched a woman with $41 stand in front of the entire world with nothing to protect her but the truth, and refuse to be reduced, and he had understood, finally, completely, that he had been solving the wrong equation. She had less than him in every way the world measured, and more of the only thing that counted. There was another way. It was reckless. It would cost him almost everything the name had ever given him. It would horrify his board, enrage Gerald Rourke, and detonate the merger in front of 400 guests and a bank of cameras. He picked up the phone and made 3 calls. The first was to a lawyer who did not work for his father. The second was to Marcus, the only man in his life who had ever told him the truth to his face. The third he did not make. He simply sat holding the phone, looking at the frozen image of Wren on the screen, and he said aloud, to the empty, enormous room, tomorrow. I'll fix it tomorrow. As myself. He had said that once before, and been too late. He did not intend to be too late twice. The wedding was at the Meridian, in the grand ballroom beneath the tower with his name on it, and it was, by every measure money could buy, perfect. 400 guests. Lilies flown in by the thousand and banked against the walls like snow. The same string quartet as before. Camilla in a gown that had taken 9 seamstresses 6 months to finish. Gerald Rourke moving through the room like a general on the morning of a battle he was already certain he had won. Julian stood behind the altar in the same small room with the same mirror, in a new tuxedo, and this time he did not run. This time he walked out the front way, down the aisle, and took his place, and let them begin, and waited, calm in a manner he had never once been calm in his entire life. Because a man who has finally decided who he is has nothing left in the world to be afraid of. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. Somewhere in his jacket pocket was a single folded receipt with a quick clever sketch on the back of it, a drawing of a man asleep on a couch that was too short for him, and every time his resolve wavered he pressed his thumb against it through the fabric. Wren was not there. She was on the rooftop of a 4th-floor walk-up across the city, alone, because she could not bear to be near a screen and could not bear to be far from one either, watching the sun go down over a skyline with his name on it, telling herself it was better this way, that the story had ended the way her stories always ended, that at least she had refused the check and kept the one thing that had always been hers, which was the truth about who she was. She did not see what happened in the ballroom. Half the city did. The officiant reached the line. The line where the running had happened last time. If anyone can show just cause why these two should not be joined together, let them speak now, or forever. And Julian Ashcroft turned around, to 400 guests and the bank of cameras Gerald Rourke had personally invited to broadcast his triumph, and he said, clearly, into the silence, I can. The ballroom went so quiet you could hear the lilies. I owe this room an apology, he said, and his voice did not shake, and I owe one woman a great deal more. Camilla, you deserve a marriage. This was never going to be one, and you know it, and I know it, and your father knows it, and he arranged it anyway, and I let him, because I was a coward who mistook obedience for duty. He looked at Camilla, and to the astonishment of everyone watching, she looked, for one flickering instant before her training closed over it, profoundly relieved. I'm sorry I let it come this far. You deserved a man who chose you. So did I. Gerald Rourke was on his feet. Julian. Think very carefully about your next word. 10,000 jobs. The takeover. Everything your father built with his own 2 hands. You will lose all of it before the music stops. I've thought about nothing else for a week, Julian said. He turned, not to Rourke, but to the cameras, to the whole watching city on the other side of the lenses. 3 weeks ago this company would have been mine to lose. So this morning, I made it not mine to lose. I signed 60% of my voting shares into a trust controlled by the employees of Ashcroft Global. 10,000 people. They can't be fired by a hostile takeover, because they now own the very thing being taken. It's done. It's filed. It's public. It's irreversible. A sound moved through the room like wind through a field of wheat. You threatened their jobs to control me, Gerald. So I gave the jobs to the people who actually do them. And now you have nothing left to hold over my head, because I have finally, at 34 years old, given away the only thing anyone ever used to own me. He reached up and unpinned the white boutonniere from his lapel, and set it, gently, on the altar rail. There is a woman across this city, he said, quieter now, but the microphones caught every word and carried it into a million homes, who found me in the rain when I was nobody, and treated me like somebody. Who refused a check that would have changed her entire life. Who stood in front of all of you in a flour-stained apron and told the truth, while I stood up here in a tailored suit and said nothing. Her name is Wren Callahan. The papers you were fed called her a schemer. She is the single most honest person I have ever met, and I have spent my whole life among people who lie for a living, so believe me, I would know the difference. He stepped down off the dais. I'm not marrying anyone today, he said. I'm sorry about the flowers. Send them to a hospital. Somebody in this city should get to enjoy them. And Julian Ashcroft walked out the front door of his own wedding, past 400 stunned and murmuring faces, past a father-in-law who would never again own a single thing that truly mattered, past Camilla, who watched him go with the ghost of a smile she would deny for the rest of her life. He walked out into the ordinary gray evening, a man worth suddenly and dramatically a great deal less than he had been at breakfast, and, for the very first time in all his years, worth something to himself. The rain was just beginning again. He turned his collar up against it and started to run. Wren watched the last of the sun go down and did not know, yet, that anything had changed. Up on her roof there was no screen. There was only the city and the tower and the cooling air and the ache she was learning to live with. She heard the roof door open behind her. She assumed it was a neighbor. She didn't turn around. I owe you $40, Julian said. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway in a tuxedo, again, the second ruined tuxedo of their short strange history, the bow tie undone, the boutonniere gone, his shoes soaked because he had run the last block in the rain that had just begun. He was out of breath. There was a look on his face she had never seen on him or on anyone, the look of a man who had set fire to his own cage and walked out through the flames and found, on the other side, that he was still alive. You're supposed to be getting married, she said. Her voice did not work properly. I was, he said. I didn't. I told 400 people the truth instead. I told them about you. He took a step onto the roof. I gave the company to the people who work there so no one could ever use it to own me again. I'm worth a lot less than I was this morning, Wren. I wanted you to know that first, before anything else, because I need you to understand that I'm not the tower anymore. I'm just the man you gave a couch to. That's all I've got left. I gave the rest away so I could stand here and mean it. She stared at him. The check, uncashed, was in a drawer beside a folded acceptance letter. The sink he'd fixed still didn't leak. The plate was still stacked wrong. You put my name on live television, she said. Do you have any idea? I know exactly what I did. He crossed the roof to her, slowly, the way he had reached for her hand across the kitchen table, giving her every chance to stop him. You told me not to make you a promise I'd forget the moment I was back under my own name. So I got rid of the name. Now it's just Julian. And I'm asking, the way I said I would, up these stairs, as myself. He was close now, rain in his hair, the whole glittering indifferent city at their backs. Give a ridiculous, impossible thing a chance. Not because I'm worth billions. I'm not, anymore. Because on the worst night of my life you opened a door, and I have not stopped wanting to be the man you thought was worth letting in. She thought about all the stories that ended with the woman like her in a headline. She thought about the $41 and the acceptance letter and every careful wall she had built to keep exactly this from happening. And then she thought, I have spent my whole life not believing beautiful things said late at night. Maybe, just once, the beautiful thing is true. You stacked the plate wrong, she said, and her voice broke, and she was smiling and crying at the same time. It goes on the left. You've been getting it wrong for a week. Then I'll need a very long time to learn, he said, in your kitchen, if you'll have me, and she closed the last of the distance and kissed him in the rain on the roof of a fourth-floor walk-up, and this time there was no wedding to run from and no name to hide behind and no check between them, only a baker and a man who used to be a tower, and the whole city glittering on, no longer indifferent, because two people who were never supposed to meet had refused, in the end, to let the map decide. They came down out of the rain. She made tea in two mismatched mugs and gave him the one without the chip. He cashed nothing, kept nothing, wanted nothing but the couch that was too short and the woman who'd let him have it. Posey came home and screamed and hugged him. Tessa withheld judgment for a full month and then, grudgingly, admitted the world occasionally got one right. The check went uncashed forever. Wren framed it, blank and refused, over the fixed sink, as a reminder to them both of the day they had each chosen the harder, truer thing. He was not a billionaire anymore. He was, by his own admission, alarmingly ordinary now, a man who ran a small foundation and came home smelling of ordinary weather, who learned to stack a plate correctly and never once got it wrong again after that, who kept $40 folded in his wallet and never spent it. And on a rainy night a year later, on the same roof, he got down on one knee in a suit that fit him like a life he had actually chosen, and asked, and she said yes before he finished, and told him to hurry up, and he laughed the laugh that only she could pull from him. The man the city had once searched for was never really found by the police, or the press, or the family that owned him. He was found by a tired woman on a dark landing who opened a door she had every reason to keep shut. And that, in the end, was the only search that ever mattered. If this story warmed your heart, take a moment to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes the right door, opened on the worst night, can change an entire life. Your support means everything, and it keeps these stories coming. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.